Context is important, that's true. Flamethrowers.
You are afraid. Amber lash of searing flame. Lungs filled with acrid smoke. You ought to be afraid. You're made out of meat. The flamethrower. A terrifying weapon capable of fiery devastation, and one so excessive it barely seems real. So, what practical purpose does such a weapon serve? Why is such a fearsome weapon so fascinating? And what sort of maniac would wield one? Fire has a long history. It's been used as a weapon since ancient times. And it's easy to see why. It's a destructive force that consumes all in its path, and all it needs is ignition. Greek fire is the first weapon that could be described as a flamethrower, a secret source of volatile compounds projected from ships in naval combat. It was used by the Byzantine Empire from the 7th century and could set the sea ablaze as well as enemy ships.
Is he throwing it?
It was a terrifying and effective weapon with profound impact.
I feel like
the
it's
modern
like
flamethrower,
it,
as we know it today, was a
like
German
a base
invention.
with water.
The name flamethrower is a literal translation of Flammenwerfer. The invention is generally attributed to Richard Fiedler, a mechanical engineer from Berlin. While working on nozzle designs, he was struck by the prospect of spraying a flammable liquid, then igniting it to project a gout of flame. His first flamethrower patent was granted in 1901, and by 1905, a working prototype was presented to the Prussian Engineering Committee for assessment. In 1908, Fiedler's flamethrower was assigned to the Pioneer Experimental Company in two forms: the Großflammenwerfer, or Grof, an emplaced weapon with a large tank, and the Kleine Flammenwerfer, or Kleif, a smaller backpack variant that could be carried. 1914 saw the outbreak of the First World War, and it was the winter of that year, in the Argonne, against the French, that these flamethrowers were first fielded. However, they didn't prove particularly effective. The Kleif was too fragile, too unwieldy, and did not maintain pressure. The Germans saw their potential, however, and established the Flammenwerfer Abteilung Redemann.
I never
A unit
understood how
armed
that works
exclusively with-
ever though. Like, you have to get so fucking close to your enemy, right? Like, you're just gonna get shot before you get into flamethrower range, no? 50 meters, fuck you, 50 meters.
With flamethrowers, commanded by Bernhard Redemann, who had played
No
a key role
fucking
in
way,
the technical
dude.
development of the weapon. There,
Also, not 30 meters either. There's no way you can shoot 30 meters with a flamethrower. Are you insane?
first attack was early in
Yeah, keep
1915,
decreasing it
and
until
they
I
would
make-
see
until we make
considerable
it
subsequent
believable.
deployment, including the Second Battle of Ypres and the Battle of Verdun. Some of the shortfalls
You'll
of the
probably
Kleif
say-
were addressed in 1917 with the introduction of the Wechselapparat, or VEX. It had a distinctive donut-shaped tank and was much lighter. During the war, Redemann's flamethrower troops carried out 653 attacks. 82% were deemed successful. Flamethrower attacks were risky, but they could break through hardpoints and sap enemy morale like nothing else. So in the decades that followed, as the Second World War loomed, the flamethrower had not been...
30 meters, lol. Dude, that's not even 10 meters, alright? Just saying. This is not even 10 meters in perspective.
forgotten, with many nations preparing their own implementation. The Germans replaced their earlier designs with the Flammenwerfer 41, yet lighter, more reliable, and easier to operate. The Brits had the Flamethrower Portable No. 2, which was a copy of the German Vex. The Italians had the Lancia Fiamma M40,
Lancia
the Japanese the Type 93 and Type 100, and the Soviets had the ROKS-2. The Americans introduced the M1 flamethrower in 1941, which used diesel oil or fuel oil. And the revised M1A1 in 1943 operated at a higher pressure to facilitate the use of napalm instead. By 1944, the M1 was succeeded by the much superior M2, with improved regulation, ergonomics, and a new rotary cartridge ignition system. The M2 design was successful, so much so that it saw use after World War II, in Korea and even Vietnam, although here it was supplanted by the more modern M9 design. Flamethrowers remained decisive weapons during the Second World War, but combat was evolving. Armoured tanks, more precise artillery, and aerial bombardment. In fact, by the latter part of the 20th century, the man-portable flamethrower was largely obsolete. Flame tanks offered a much safer way to clear out entrenched enemies, with none of the capacity or range restrictions a man-portable device might impose. Besides, these days it's much safer to just call in an airstrike than it is to attempt to burn them out. So most contemporary use of the flamethrower is either for non-combat purposes, such as controlled burns or clearing land, or in cinema, television, and games. Here, the flamethrower has evolved into its own unique thing. Terrifying and imposing on screen, and rather than an infantryman, you're more likely to see it in the hands of an action hero,
carried
or
on
a
the backs
fictional
of ground troops had a range of about 45 yards, 41 meters, and enough fuel for about 10 seconds of continuous firing.
10 seconds? What? The fuck? I don't know how they measure distance though, I'm not sure.
Supervillain like Hank Scorpio or Elon Musk.
I don't know.
The flamethrower is rooted in its military origins, however, and most of its earliest appearances are in the hands of American soldiers. Think Porkchop Hill and Hell is for Heroes. It's not often shown in use.
I'm gonna check
during this era.
Video of
Immolation was a little too grisly for
flamethrower.
1950s Hollywood, so most shots are reverse angle, the heroes discharging flame towards the camera. Burning Nazis implied rather than shown. By the 1970s, there was a shift, when directors no longer shied from the horrors of war, showing its centre frame. The Deer Hunter is one of the more memorable depictions, focusing on the psychological effects of the Vietnam War. In games, wartime settings became popular with first-person shooters towards the end of the 90s, and although you won't find flamethrowers in the earliest examples, the weapon would soon become a staple part of their arsenal.
What is this?
Amongst the
Wolfenstein
first
one?
was World War II GI, which was built on the Duke Nukem 3D engine and released in 1999. Call of Duty was hot on its heels, with the United Offensive add-on for the first game featuring the German Flammenwerfer 35. Treyarch, it seems, and their precursor Grey Matter Interactive have a bit of an affinity for flamethrowers. The American campaign in Call of Duty World at War takes place in the Pacific Theater, where there is copious deployment of the American M2 against Japanese fortifications. And the Black Ops series has flamethrowers as well, either as a weapon attachment or as part of a specialist loadout. Fair to say then that military shooters are a bit of a hotspot for flamethrowers. If it's a game set in either of the world wars or even Vietnam, then there's a fairly good chance you'll find one. They're not confined to military shooters though. There is a considerable intersection between the war and horror genres. They share a common psychological aspect. As terrible as it is, the flamethrower fits this union perfectly. It's a potent symbol of inhumanity, the depths to which conflict can drive us. I think for this reason we prefer to see such weapons used against inhuman enemies, something for which we feel no empathy.
The fuck? I don't even remember these units. The fuck? What game is this? StarCraft 2?
Conflict can drive us.
Fire bats? That rings a bell. Fire bats. Didn't they have Hellions? What the fuck are these fire bats? Oh, fire bats! No, fire bats is fucking. It's StarCraft 1 fire bats. Fire bats is StarCraft 1. And they had it in the campaign. Okay, yeah, that's why I don't remember it, because I'm not a fucking casual.
I think for this reason we prefer to see such weapons used against inhuman enemies.
I forget people.
Something for which we feel no empathy. Something dangerous enough to drive us to extreme measure. An early example is Them, a 1954 science fiction film where giant irradiated ants terrorize the United States. With the threat of widespread infestation, the only hope is to purge their nests, queen and all, with cleansing fire. This is parallel to the Alien series, in which incinerator units play a prominent role and prove to be a reasonably effective weapon against the xenomorph threat. Not as effective as nuking the entire site from orbit, but it'll do in a pinch. The Alien franchise has exerted considerable influence on the sci-fi horror genre, and there's no shortage of games that take direct influence. Prominent amongst them are Bungie's. The Marathon trilogy features a flamethrower, first found in a level named Smells Like Napalm, Tastes Like Chicken. It's very satisfying to use against organic enemies. The high-pitched screams of the Thor as their scorched forms collapse is quite memorable.
Sounds like chickens too.
The Halo series features one too, of course. The Flood burn quite nicely. Fire was used in a similar capacity in 1980.
You know, like, what is the point of the video? It's showing every video game that has fucking flamethrowers. We get it. Conclusion. Okay.
Frightful weapon that plays to our most primal fear. Born of grim necessity, it is an illumination of horror. Fire is a savage beast, and yet we think ourselves its master. But be warned, the barbecue's hot, and you're in season. The flamethrower. Incendiary. Intimidating. Infernal. Thank you very much for watching, and until next time, farewell.
Alright. Wouldn't it be like imagine like a water gun or like a flamethrower, but instead of fire, it shoots out like really like strong acid, you know? Like really, really strong dissolving acid. I guess you can just replace it with a fucking rifle instead, maybe. Yeah, you can replace everything with a fucking long-range rifle instead, I guess.